What happens when survival forces enemies to make choices that could change everything? In this story, the line between captive and savior disappears, leaving only the raw truth of life and death. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the Apache camp, nestled in the shadow of the rugged mountains. It was the summer of 1875, and the uneasy peace between the Apache tribe and the white settlers was tenuous at best. Chief Running Elk stood tall at the edge of the camp, his weathered face betraying years of hardship and conflict. His 5-year-old son, Little Hawk, played nearby, throwing small stones into the swift-moving river that cut through their territory. "Father, look how far I can throw," Little Hawk called out proudly, his small voice barely carrying over the sound of the rushing water. Running Elk smiled, a rare sight these days. "Be careful near the water, my son. The river is strong after the rains." 3 days earlier, a small party of Apache warriors had returned from a scouting mission with a prisoner, a white woman named Sarah Miller. She had been traveling with a wagon train when they captured her, bringing her back as leverage against the increasingly aggressive cavalry forces encroaching on their land. Sarah sat under guard at the edge of the camp, her blonde hair matted and her blue dress torn and dirty from the journey. Despite her situation, she maintained a quiet dignity that had earned her grudging respect from some of the tribe members. Tall Feather, one of the younger warriors, brought her a small cup of water. "Thank you," Sarah said softly, her voice steady despite her fear. Tall Feather nodded curtly. "Chief says you live if your people stay away from our hunting grounds." Sarah drank the water slowly. "My people may not even know I'm here. I was separated from the others when—" Her voice trailed off as she recalled the attack that had left her alone and vulnerable. Across the camp, Medicine Woman approached Chief Running Elk with concern etched on her face. "The white woman does not eat. She grows weak." Running Elk frowned. "She must live. She is our only protection against the soldiers." "Perhaps she could be useful," Medicine Woman suggested. "She watches the children with kind eyes." The chief considered this. Having Sarah help with the children would keep her occupied and possibly prevent her from attempting escape. "Very well. She may help with the children, but she must be watched." As the day wore on, Sarah was brought to the center of the camp where several Apache children played. Little Hawk immediately approached her, curious about her pale skin and light hair. "Your hair is like the sun," he said in broken English, reaching up to touch a loose strand. Sarah couldn't help but smile. "And yours is like the night sky," she replied, gently touching his dark hair. Little Hawk giggled and took her hand. "Come, I show you where fish jump." Before Sarah's guard could object, the boy was pulling her toward the river's edge. Several other children followed, excited by the newcomer's presence. Sarah glanced back nervously, but seeing that her guards were following at a distance, she allowed Little Hawk to lead her. At the riverbank, the children showed Sarah how they caught small fish with their bare hands. She watched, amazed by their skill and agility. For a brief moment, she forgot she was a prisoner as she laughed with the children. Running Elk observed from a distance, his expression unreadable. "The white woman seems good with children," he remarked to Tall Feather. "Yes, but can she be trusted?" Tall Feather replied, his hand never far from his knife. "Trust is earned," Running Elk said thoughtfully, "as is respect." As dusk approached, storm clouds gathered over the distant mountains. The air grew heavy with the promise of rain, and lightning flashed on the horizon. Running Elk ordered everyone back to the safety of the camp, away from the increasingly turbulent river. "Little Hawk, come," he called to his son, who was still playing near the water's edge with 2 other boys. Little Hawk waved in acknowledgement but continued to toss stones into the swirling current. Sarah, who had been helping gather the younger children, noticed his disobedience and the dangerous rise of the water level. "Little Hawk," she called out, "your father wants you to come now. The river is getting dangerous." The boy looked up at her, then at the darkening sky. "One more stone," he insisted, bending to pick up a particularly smooth rock. Sarah felt a knot of fear form in her stomach as she watched the child step closer to the edge. The recent rains had made the bank slippery and unstable. Without thinking of her status as a prisoner, she moved quickly toward him. "Little Hawk, please come away from there." she pleaded, her voice urgent. The first heavy raindrops began to fall as thunder rumbled overhead. The camp erupted into activity as people rushed to secure their belongings against the impending storm. In the commotion, few noticed the drama unfolding at the river's edge. Little Hawk, determined to throw his last stone, stepped onto a jutting rock at the water's edge. Sarah saw it happen before anyone else. The rock shifted under his weight, slick with rain, and loosened by the rising water. With a startled cry, Little Hawk lost his balance and tumbled into the churning river. "Help!" Sarah screamed, her voice cutting through the thunder and the sounds of the camp. "The chief's son! He's fallen in!" Running Elk turned, his face a mask of horror as he saw the small form of his son being swept away by the current. Without hesitation, Sarah kicked off her worn boots and plunged into the cold, angry waters after the boy. The icy river water shocked Sarah's system as she plunged beneath the surface. The current was stronger than she had anticipated, immediately pulling her downstream with frightening speed. Opening her eyes against the murky water, she caught a glimpse of Little Hawk's small form tumbling helplessly ahead of her. His arms flailed wildly, his face a mask of terror when he briefly surfaced. Sarah had grown up near the Mississippi River in Missouri. Her father, a riverboat captain, had taught her to swim when she was barely older than Little Hawk. Those lessons now became the difference between life and death, not just for her, but for the chief's son as well. She streamlined her body, using the current rather than fighting against it, her arms cutting through the water with powerful strokes. "I'm coming," she gasped when her head broke the surface, though she knew the boy couldn't hear her over the roar of the river and the thunder overhead. On the shore, chaos erupted. Running Elk sprinted along the riverbank, his face contorted with fear and desperation. Several warriors followed, some attempting to outpace the current, others grabbing for branches or ropes that might be extended to the victims. "My son!" Running Elk bellowed, his voice raw with emotion. "Save my son!" Tall Feather raced ahead, looking for a narrowing in the river where they might have a chance to intercept the two figures being swept away. The rain fell harder now, making the rocky shoreline treacherous and visibility poor. In the water, Sarah focused solely on reaching Little Hawk. The boy had gone under again, and for a heart-stopping moment, she lost sight of him. Then she spotted his small hand breaking the surface about 10 feet ahead. With renewed determination, she pushed forward, ignoring the burning in her lungs and the numbness creeping into her limbs from the cold water. "Just a little more," she told herself, stretching out her arm as she closed the distance. Little Hawk's head emerged again, his eyes wide with terror, water streaming from his mouth as he coughed and gasped. Sarah made one final lunge and managed to grab his arm. Pulling him against her chest, she turned onto her back, keeping the boy's face above water as she had been taught. "I've got you," she said between labored breaths. "I've got you, Little Hawk. Hold on to me." The boy clung to her, his small body trembling violently against hers. Though the immediate danger of drowning had lessened, they were still at the mercy of the raging river. Sarah knew they needed to make it to shore before hypothermia set in, or they were dashed against the rocks that jutted from the water at irregular intervals. She spotted a fallen tree extending partway into the river about 50 yards ahead. It would be their best chance. Using one arm to hold Little Hawk securely against her, and the other to guide their course, she angled toward it, fighting against the current that sought to carry them past this potential salvation. "There!" shouted Tall Feather from the shore, pointing to the same fallen tree. "They are heading for the dead pine." The Apache warriors converged on the spot, several wading into the shallows, forming a human chain to extend their reach. Running Elk was at the forefront, his hand outstretched, his eyes never leaving the two figures struggling in the water. Sarah saw them waiting and redoubled her efforts. "Almost there," she gasped to Little Hawk, who had grown ominously quiet in her arms. "Your father is waiting for you. Stay with me, Little Hawk." With one final desperate kick, she managed to grab a protruding branch of the fallen tree. The force of the current threatened to tear them away, but she held fast, her knuckles white with effort, her muscles screaming in protest. "Reach!" she called to the warriors on shore. "Please!" Tall Feather stretched out as far as he could without losing his footing, but the gap was still too wide. It was Running Elk who made the decisive move, plunging into the shallows without regard for his own safety, extending the chain by crucial feet. "Give me my son," he commanded, his arms reaching for them. Sarah used her last reserves of strength to lift Little Hawk toward his father. "Take him first," she insisted, pushing the boy into Running Elk's waiting hands. The chief seized his son and passed him back along the human chain to safety. Then, without hesitation, he reached for Sarah again. "Now you, brave one." Their fingertips touched, slipped, then connected. Running Elk's strong hand closed around her wrist, and with the help of the other warriors, he pulled her from the river's deadly embrace. As soon as she was within reach of the shore, multiple hands grabbed her, dragging her onto solid ground where she collapsed, coughing and shivering. Medicine Woman was already attending to Little Hawk, turning him onto his side to expel the water from his lungs. The boy coughed violently, water streaming from his mouth, but he was breathing. A collective sigh of relief passed through the gathered tribe members. Running Elk knelt beside his son, placing a gentle hand on the boy's back. "Little Hawk, my son," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. The boy's eyes fluttered open. "Father," he whispered weakly. Then his gaze shifted to Sarah, who lay nearby, still catching her breath. "The Sun Hair Woman. She caught me." Running Elk turned to Sarah. His expression transformed. Gone was the suspicious glare of a captor. In its place was something new. Respect, gratitude, perhaps even the beginning of trust. "You saved my son when you could have escaped," he said simply. Sarah managed to sit up, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill. "I couldn't let him drown," she replied, her teeth chattering. "No child deserves such a fate." Medicine Woman approached with blankets, wrapping one around Little Hawk and offering the other to Sarah. "Come," she said. "Both need warmth and medicine." They were carried back to camp, the storm still raging around them, but somehow less threatening now. In the chief's lodge, Medicine Woman worked quickly to warm them, brewing a tea of herbs and roots that she insisted would prevent the river sickness. Sarah sat near the fire, the blanket pulled tight around her shoulders, watching as Little Hawk drifted into an exhausted sleep in his father's arms. The danger had passed, but she knew this moment had changed everything. She was no longer simply a captive, a bargaining chip to be used against her people. She had become something else in the eyes of the tribe. As if reading her thoughts, Running Elk spoke softly across the fire. "Why did you risk your life for my son? We are enemies." Sarah considered her answer carefully. "Are we? I don't know you, and you don't know me. We were made enemies by circumstances, not by choice." She glanced at the sleeping child. "And Little Hawk has shown me nothing but kindness since I arrived." Running Elk studied her for a long moment. "You have the heart of a warrior," he finally said. "And the Apache do not forget those who save their children." Outside, the storm began to subside, the thunder growing more distant, the rain softening to a gentle patter against the lodge. Something had shifted between captor and captive, something as profound as the change in the weather. "Rest now," Running Elk said, rising with his son in his arms. "Tomorrow we will speak more." As Sarah lay back on the soft furs provided for her, no longer bound as she had been on previous nights, she wondered what this new day would bring. She was still far from home, still surrounded by those her people called enemies. But for the first time since her capture, she felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, she thought as sleep began to claim her, there was a way forward that didn't end in more bloodshed. Perhaps in saving one small life, she had opened a door to understanding between two worlds locked in conflict. With the rhythm of the falling rain lulling her toward dreams, Sarah closed her eyes, exhaustion finally overcoming her. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight at least, she had earned a measure of peace. Dawn broke over the Apache camp, painting the eastern sky in hues of amber and rose. Sarah awoke to find herself still in the chief's lodge, though Running Elk and Little Hawk were nowhere to be seen. For a moment, she considered her situation, no longer bound but still a captive. Or was she? The events of the previous day had altered her status in ways she didn't fully understand. She sat up, wincing at the soreness in her muscles from her struggle against the river. A movement at the lodge entrance caught her attention, and she turned to see Medicine Woman entering, carrying a wooden bowl of steaming liquid. "Drink," the older woman said, offering the bowl to Sarah. "It will give strength back to your body." Sarah accepted it gratefully, inhaling the earthy aroma. "Thank you," she said, taking a cautious sip of the bitter brew. "How is Little Hawk this morning?" A rare smile crossed Medicine Woman's weathered face. "The chief's son is strong. He plays already, though his father watches him closely now." She regarded Sarah with newfound respect. "You have good medicine in you, white woman. Strong spirit." Before Sarah could respond, the lodge flap opened again, and Running Elk entered. His presence filled the small space, commanding yet somehow less intimidating than before. Little Hawk trailed behind him, his dark eyes brightening when he saw Sarah. "Sunhair woman," he exclaimed, rushing to her side. "Father says you pulled me from the angry river." Sarah smiled, reaching out to gently touch his cheek. "And you were very brave, Little Hawk." Running Elk watched this interaction with thoughtful eyes. "My son lives because of your courage," he said at length. "The Apache do not forget such debts." "I don't consider it a debt," Sarah replied. "I only did what anyone would do." The chief shook his head. "No, not anyone." He gestured for her to rise. "Come, there is something you should see." Curious, Sarah followed Running Elk outside, Little Hawk skipping alongside them. The morning air was fresh after the storm, the world washed clean. As they walked through the camp, Sarah noticed the changed attitudes of the tribe members. Where before there had been suspicion and hostility, now there were nods of acknowledgement, even a few tentative smiles. They reached the edge of the camp, where a small group of warriors had gathered, including Tall Feather. They were looking out across the valley toward a distant plume of dust that signaled riders approaching. "Soldiers," Tall Feather said grimly, handing a spyglass to Running Elk. "Many, coming from the fort." Running Elk studied the approaching riders for a long moment before passing the spyglass to Sarah. "Your people come," he said simply. Sarah's heart leaped as she peered through the lens. Indeed, the distant riders wore the blue uniforms of the U.S. Cavalry. Her first instinct was joy. Rescue was at hand. But as she lowered the glass and looked at the faces around her, especially Little Hawk's trusting expression, she felt an unexpected pang of concern. "What will happen now?" she asked, returning the spyglass to Running Elk. The chief's expression was unreadable. "That depends on what you tell them when they arrive." Sarah understood the implication immediately. If she told the soldiers she had been mistreated, it would justify retaliation against the Apache. If she spoke of her rescue of Little Hawk, it might be dismissed as Stockholm Syndrome or a fabrication. "What do you want me to tell them?" she asked carefully. Running Elk studied her for a long moment. "The truth," he finally said, "whatever that means to you." This simple statement, delivered without manipulation or threat, affected Sarah deeply. She realized that in this moment, Running Elk was treating her not as a captive but as an equal, someone whose judgment and integrity he respected. "Chief," Tall Feather interrupted urgently, "we should prepare the warriors. The soldiers may attack." Running Elk raised a hand. "No, today we will talk, not fight." He turned back to Sarah. "Will you speak with them first? Tell them there is no need for weapons today." Sarah nodded, touched by his trust. "I will." As the cavalry drew closer, the entire tribe gathered behind Running Elk and Sarah. Little Hawk stood between them, reaching up to hold Sarah's hand. The gesture was not lost on the warriors, nor would it be lost on the approaching soldiers. The cavalry unit, led by a stern-faced major, pulled up about 50 yards from the Apache camp. The major's surprise was evident when he saw Sarah standing freely among the tribe members. "Miss Miller," he called out, "are you unharmed?" "Step away from them immediately." Sarah squeezed Little Hawk's hand reassuringly, before walking forward alone, stopping halfway between the two groups. "Major," she acknowledged, "I am unharmed. There's no need for weapons today." The major frowned, clearly suspicious. "Miss Miller, these savages attacked your wagon train and took you prisoner. Step aside so we can do our duty." Sarah stood her ground. "What happened to the others from my wagon train?" "Rescued and safe at Fort Benson," the major replied impatiently. "Now, please." "Then there has been enough violence," Sarah interrupted firmly. "I was taken, yes, but I have not been harmed. And yesterday," she paused, looking back at Little Hawk. "Yesterday I had the opportunity to build a bridge of understanding between our peoples." The major dismounted, approaching Sarah with concern. "Miss Miller, you've been through an ordeal. These feelings aren't uncommon in captives. But I assure you, once we get you back to the fort— Major, Sarah cut in, her voice stronger now. I saved Chief Running Elk's son from drowning yesterday. In return, they have treated me with respect and kindness. I will return with you willingly, but first I ask that you listen to what the chief has to say. There may be a path to peace here that benefits everyone. The major looked past her to where Running Elk stood, proud and unintimidated. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded curtly. Very well, I'll hear him out. Sarah turned and gestured for Running Elk to approach. The chief stepped forward, leaving Little Hawk in Medicine Woman's care. I am Running Elk, he said in clear, if accented English. The woman with hair like the sun saved my son when others would have let him drown. This woman has shown us that not all white people seek our destruction. Perhaps it is time we learn to speak instead of fight. The major's expression remained skeptical, but he inclined his head slightly. What are you proposing, Chief? A meeting, Running Elk replied, between your leaders and mine, to discuss boundaries that all can respect. The fighting benefits no one. Too many widows, too many fatherless children. Sarah watched as the major considered this proposal. She knew what was at stake, not just her freedom, but potentially a new understanding between two peoples locked in bloody conflict. I cannot make such decisions, the major finally said, but I can take your request to Colonel Harrison at the fort. Running Elk nodded. That is fair. He turned to Sarah. Will you speak for us when you return with them? Tell them what you have seen here? Sarah met his gaze steadily. I will tell them the truth, that I have seen humanity and compassion where I was told I would find only savagery, that I have seen a father's love for his son that transcends the boundaries of race or culture. A look of understanding passed between them, a moment of connection that bridged the vast gulf of their different worlds. Then Running Elk stepped back, addressing the major once more. Take her safely to your fort. When the next moon is full, send word if your leaders will meet with ours. The major nodded stiffly, then offered his arm to Sarah. Come, Miss Miller. Let's get you home. Sarah hesitated, looking back at the Apache camp, at Little Hawk, who watched with confused eyes, not understanding why his savior was leaving. She knelt down as the boy ran to her. Are you going away? He asked, his voice small and hurt. For now, Sarah replied gently. But I will not forget you, Little Hawk, and perhaps if the Great Spirit is kind, we will meet again someday. The boy threw his arms around her neck in a fierce embrace. I will look for you when the moon is full, he whispered. Sarah blinked back tears as she released him and rose to follow the major. As they walked toward the waiting cavalry, she could feel the weight of many eyes upon her, Apache and white alike, all wondering what her words might mean for the future of their uneasy coexistence. Whatever came next, Sarah knew that her life had been irrevocably changed by her time with the Apache. She had come to see beyond the simplistic labels of savage and civilized, finding instead the common humanity that connected all people, if only they had the courage to look for it. As she mounted the horse provided for her and cast one last glance at Running Elk and Little Hawk, she made a silent promise to honor the trust they had placed in her, and to do whatever she could to build understanding between their worlds. 2 months had passed since Sarah's return to Fort Benson. Summer had given way to early autumn, bringing cooler temperatures and skies of startling clarity to the Arizona territory. Sarah stood on the porch of Colonel Harrison's headquarters, watching as a mixed group of Army officers and Apache leaders gathered in the parade ground. Against all odds, her testimony had made a difference. Her account of her time with Running Elk's people, especially the story of Little Hawk's rescue, had touched even the most hardened military men at the fort. Colonel Harrison, though initially skeptical, had eventually agreed to arrange the meeting Running Elk had proposed. Miss Miller, the colonel's voice came from behind her. The Apache delegation is complete. Chief Running Elk has arrived. Sarah turned, unable to hide her anticipation. Thank you, Colonel. May I greet them? Harrison nodded, though his expression remained cautious. Just remember, these negotiations are delicate. We've had 3 weeks of tentative peace, the longest in 2 years, but one wrong word could undo everything. I understand, Sarah assured him, smoothing the front of her new dress, a simple blue cotton garment donated by the colonel's wife after Sarah's return to the fort in rags. As she descended the steps, her eyes scanned the Apache group until she found Running Elk. The chief stood tall among his warriors, his face impassive, but his eyes alert. Beside him, to Sarah's delight, was Little Hawk, dressed in his finest ceremonial attire. The boy's face lit up when he spotted her. "Sun Hair Woman," he called out, breaking protocol to run toward her. The soldiers tensed, hands moving instinctively toward their weapons, but Sarah quickly knelt to receive the boy's enthusiastic embrace, defusing the moment. "Little Hawk," she said warmly, holding him at arm's length to look at him. "You've grown." The boy beamed proudly. "Father says I am becoming a warrior. I am learning to ride my own pony." Running Elk approached more sedately, raising his hand in greeting. "Sarah Miller," he said, using her full name for the first time. "It is good to see you well." "And you, Chief Running Elk," she replied with genuine respect. "Thank you for coming. I know it wasn't an easy decision." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Some decisions are difficult but necessary, like diving into a river to save an enemy's child." Colonel Harrison joined them, extending his hand to Running Elk in a gesture that would have been unthinkable months earlier. "Chief, welcome to Fort Benson. We've prepared a place where we can speak comfortably." Running Elk clasped the offered hand briefly. "My people come in peace today, Colonel. We are ready to listen and to be heard." Sarah watched this exchange with a sense of wonder. Here they were, men who had been trying to kill each other for years, meeting as equals, however tentatively. She caught Little Hawk looking up at her with a question in his eyes. "What happens now?" he asked softly. Sarah smiled down at him. "Now we talk, and if we're wise, we listen even more than we talk." The negotiations began in a large tent erected in the center of the parade ground. Maps were spread on a table, boundaries discussed, grievances aired. There were tense moments when voices rose and faces hardened, but each time, someone, often Sarah, would find a way to steer the conversation back to common ground. During a midday break, Sarah sat with Little Hawk under the shade of a cottonwood tree, teaching him a string game she had learned as a child. Nearby, several Apache women, including Medicine Woman, watched with curious eyes. "My mother knew this game," Little Hawk said suddenly, his small fingers manipulating the string with surprising dexterity. "Father says she watches me from the spirit world." Sarah's heart ached at the casual mention of the boy's loss. "I'm sure she does," she said gently, "and I'm certain she's very proud of you." Little Hawk nodded solemnly. "Father is alone now. Sometimes he is sad when he thinks I don't see." Sarah glanced toward the negotiation tent where Running Elk's deep voice could occasionally be heard. "Being a leader is difficult," she said, "especially in hard times." "Like now?" Little Hawk asked, looking up with those piercing dark eyes that seemed to see more than a child should. "Yes, like now," Sarah agreed. "But also like now, there is always hope for something better." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, the negotiators emerged from the tent. Sarah couldn't read their expressions immediately, but the absence of obvious anger gave her hope. Colonel Harrison approached her, his face etched with fatigue, but his eyes clearer than she had seen them since her return. "It seems we have the beginnings of an agreement," he said quietly. "That's wonderful news," Sarah replied, relief washing over her. "It's just a start," Harrison cautioned. "There will be those on both sides who oppose any compromise, but it's more than we had yesterday." Running Elk joined them, Little Hawk at his side. "The colonel speaks truth," he said. "Many of my young warriors will call me weak for making this treaty. Some of your soldiers will say the same of you." Harrison nodded grimly. "Then we must prove them wrong by making this work." As the day's formalities concluded, and the Apache prepared to return to their camp, now officially recognized as their territory under the preliminary agreement, Sarah found herself facing a difficult moment. Little Hawk clung to her hand, reluctant to leave. "When will you visit our camp?" he asked. "You could teach me more string games." Sarah glanced at Running Elk, uncertain how to answer. The chief studied her for a long moment before speaking. "The agreement allows for a trading post to be established at the boundary between our lands," he said. "It will need people who understand both worlds, people who can translate not just words but intentions." Sarah's breath caught as she realized what he was suggesting. "Are you offering me a position, Chief Running Elk?" A rare smile crossed his face. "The army needs someone they trust. My people need the same. You have earned the respect of both." Colonel Harrison, who had overheard the exchange, cleared his throat. It would be an unusual arrangement, but potentially valuable. We could appoint you as a civilian liaison to the trading post, if you were interested, of course. Sarah looked from the colonel to Running Elk, to Little Hawk's hopeful face. 6 months ago, she had been traveling west to start a new life as a schoolteacher in California after losing her parents. Fate had intervened, placing her on a path she could never have imagined. "I would need time to consider," she said carefully. "It's an important decision." Running Elk nodded approvingly. "Wise choices are rarely made in haste. We return to our summer camp tomorrow. In 7 days, we move to the winter grounds near the trading post site. If you decide to accept, come then." Little Hawk tugged at her hand. "Please say yes," he whispered. "You could teach our children like you wanted to teach the white children." Sarah knelt down to his level. "Would you like that, Little Hawk? If I taught you and the other children?" The boy nodded enthusiastically. "You could learn our ways too. I could teach you to ride a pony." Sarah couldn't help but laugh. "Well, that sounds like a fair exchange." She looked up at Running Elk. "A school at the trading post for both Apache and white children. Would that be possible?" The chief considered this, then inclined his head slightly. "Knowledge is a weapon stronger than any bow. My people could benefit from such learning, if it respects our ways." 1 week later, Sarah rode beside Colonel Harrison and a small escort toward the newly designated trading post site. Her few belongings were packed in saddlebags, her decision made after days of careful reflection. As they crested a ridge, she saw the Apache winter camp being established in the valley below, smoke from cooking fires rising in the clear autumn air. And there, waiting at the agreed boundary, were Running Elk and Little Hawk. The boy spotted her immediately and waved excitedly. Sarah raised her hand in return, a sense of rightness settling over her. "Are you certain about this, Miss Miller?" Colonel Harrison asked one last time. "It won't be an easy life." Sarah watched as Little Hawk broke away from his father and ran up the slope toward them, his face alight with joy. "The most meaningful paths rarely are, Colonel," she replied. "But I believe this is where I'm meant to be." As Little Hawk reached them, calling out greetings in a mixture of Apache and English, Sarah dismounted to meet him. Behind the boy, Running Elk approached more deliberately, dignity in every step. But even at a distance, she could see something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a cautious hope that mirrored her own. "Welcome," he said simply when he reached them. Sarah nodded, understanding all that remained unspoken between them. They were from different worlds, brought together by chance and choice, by a river's danger and a child's need. What grew from this unusual beginning would depend on courage, patience, and the willingness to see beyond differences to the common humanity beneath. Little Hawk grabbed her hand, eager to show her everything. "Come, I will show you where your lodge will be, and tomorrow I teach you to ride pony like I promised." Sarah laughed, allowing herself to be pulled forward. "I'm holding you to that promise," she said, meeting Running Elk's gaze over the boy's head. A look of understanding passed between them, acknowledgement of the difficult road ahead, but also of the possibility it contained. As the sun began to set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant orange and purple, Sarah took her first steps into her new life, not as captive or rescuer, but as a bridge between worlds. Behind her lay the life she had planned. Before her stretched a future she could never have imagined, bright with challenge and promise. And at her side walked a small boy whose life she had saved, and who had, in his own way, saved hers in return.